I call the Senate Redistricting Committee to order for its first hearing of the year. So members and guests, as you know, this is a very special committee formed every decade to review and redraw the lines of our congressional, state, and House districts. And we're going to do this in a very principled and open fashion. It's very early in the session to be meeting. However, I'm receiving a number of questions. I'm sure everybody else has questions too. So today what we have is an introduction by Lexi Stengel, our nonpartisan staff, who should help answer some of these questions that we have and be able to help answer some questions for our district. Before we get going, I'd like to do some introductions. If we could just give your name, your district, and maybe just one point about your district, something noteworthy. And let's start with Senator Kiffmeyer as Vice Chair. Senator Kiffmeyer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm Senator Mary Kiffmeyer. I represent Senate District 30. And the main thing about my Senate district, besides all the highways, you drive through my districts a lot, and 94, 10, 169, but also we have the outlet mall, which has great shopping as you're coming through, stop off and throw a little money in my district.
All right, and let's go to our lead. Thank you, Senator Kiffmeyer. Let's go to our lead on the DFL side, Senator Isaacson.
Thank you. I represent the northern suburbs of St. Paul and Shoreview, and I have two wonderful things about my district. Although I can't compete with Senator Bach in terms of the view or the lakes, I do have 17 lakes in my district, and one of them I caught the biggest fish ever in Lake Owasso, for myself at least, and we have a bunch of Fortune 500 companies as well. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Senator Isaacson. Senator Bach, representing the Independent Caucus. Why don't you follow up then?
Well, Mr. Chairman, Tom Bach, I worked on this process some in 2011 when we did redistricting then, and my district got geographically bigger then. My district right now is in the northeastern part of the state. There are 8 states in our country that are smaller than my Senate district, and it's probably going to get bigger. Mr. Chairman, we're going to start with District 1 in your corner and that's statutorily required. We're going to come across and you're going to bump into me and find out that you can't push me into Lake Superior or into Canada. So it'll get bigger again. So I'm looking forward to the process and hope we can find some agreement with the House. It would be almost of historic nature if we could get into conference committee and get a bill signed by the governor, but that certainly would be my goal. Thanks for putting me on the committee.
Well, thanks for being here. Appreciate that, Senator Bach. Senator Miller.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jeremy Miller, State Senator representing Senate District 28, which includes Houston, Fillmore, and Winona counties, and looking forward to working with all of you on this very important committee.
And we're going to skip something interesting in Winona. Is that?
Oh, I'm sorry. Southeastern Minnesota is the hidden gem of the state. Everybody knows Senator Bach's district is beautiful, but what a lot of people don't know is southeastern Minnesota is also a very beautiful part of the state with lakes, bluffs, and also the Mississippi River.
And really,
Senator Miller, I've been to your district a couple times and stayed in Winona, and the bluffs and the river and other things that are there are beautiful. A great weekend getaway.
Thank you, Senator Kiffmeyer.
All right, with that tourism plug, Senator Pratt, would you go?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Eric Pratt, I represent Senate District 55, which is most of Scott County in the Southwest Metro. We're one of the fastest growing districts in the country, counties in the country. So while Senator Bach's district is going to get larger, there's a very good chance mine is going to get geographically smaller. We're in the 2nd congressional district, but we abut the 3rd district, the 1st district, the 7th district, and the 6th district. All touch Scott County in some way, shape, and form. We are Minnesota's playground. We have Canterbury Park, Valley Fair, Mystic Lake, the Renaissance Festival, along with several recreational lakes that get used. great ice fishing, Senator Isaacson. Come on down.
Thank you, Senator Pratt. And two new members to the Senate, Senator Murphy, would you like to go?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everybody. My name is Erin Murphy. I am a newly elected member of the Minnesota Senate, and I represent District 64, which is the westernmost part of St. Paul. If you come to visit this district, and I bet lots of you have been here, you will see that it is a diverse district in that there is lots of housing, lots of retail corridors, Grand Avenue, University Avenue, and Highland Park, Selby Avenue, among them. It also has the longest stretch of Victorian homes in the nation, right down Summit Avenue, which is beautiful. This is a district that is filled with people deeply engaged in the civic life of Minnesota and in our politics. And the people who live here are excited that I am serving on this committee to be a part of setting the course for Minnesota over the next decade. And the last thing I will say, and I shared this with Senator Miller the other day, but my family comes from the Wisconsin side of Winona, just a little south of there, a little place called Gays Mills, or where my dad's farm was, the Rolling Ground. So I am very familiar with the Bluffs, the Karst area, and all that has to offer as a kid who grew up in that area, playing in the apple orchard right behind my grandma's farm. I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Murphy. Good to have
Senator
you.
Johnson,
Yes.
is this committee being broadcast somewhere if people want to
Yes,
watch it?
I believe Senate Media is broadcasting this.
I'm just getting some messages that the committee page is not showing it, and I don't know where I'd find it if I was a constituent.
Okay.
Wonder if you could just look into that while we're getting
Yeah.
going.
If we could have, Will, if you'd be willing to check into that, that'd be great.
Just let me know. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you. And last but not least, Senator Kunish, right? I'm sorry.
Yep, that's okay. Yeah, Senator Kunish, I represent District 41, which is St. Anthony Village, New Brighton, Columbia Heights, Hilltop, Fridley, and a little bit of Spring Lake Park. Last 4 years, I represented District 41B, so scooted over to the Senate to do the good work. What I'm really super proud of my district is the ability, the walkability, and the number of parks that we have available to our communities. And within those parks are buildings where you can hold events. There are ice skating rinks, hockey rinks, trails and trails and trails. We have Silverwood Park that brings people from all over to that park and to that lake. And just really proud of the work that we've done to ensure that we have those kind of outdoor activities for our communities. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you. And it's good to have you here. I just got a couple of messages here that this committee can be found streaming on the Minnesota Senate Media YouTube channel. So if you want to direct anybody that has questions to go there, that'd be good. And I'll wrap up by saying I'm Senator Mark Johnson. I hail from the 1st District up here in Northwest Minnesota. So Senator Bach has the Northeast corner of the state. I've got the Northwest corner of the state. And we've got a real diverse economy up here with industries, companies such as Arctic Cat and Polaris, Marvin Windows. We also have a very, very large agricultural economy up here as well. So a lot of different opportunities up here. If you're looking for a job, we've got one. So come on up to Northwest Minnesota.
And great walleye fishing.
Oh, you've been here, Mary. You know.
Mr. Chairman, if I find a job up there, is there a home available that I could buy?
Well, we'll figure that out. So I do construction too, so we'll build one for you if you want. So I think we could team up there. So with that, I know we've got a hard stop at noon today. I do want to go back briefly to what Senator Miller said earlier about Friday meetings. I know typically in the last 4 years, we haven't done a lot on Fridays simply because we're a part-time legislature and we've got other duties and responsibilities too that we should be taking care of. one of the things that we're running into issues is, you know, time slots available for this is a temporary committee. We don't have a standing time slot. So staff and just members availability is tough to find. So I don't want to say that we're going to be meeting on Fridays every time. However, you know, when we do need to meet, this is a distinct possibility, but we'll try to limit that as much as we can. So with that, Ms. Stengel, if you would, we'll turn it over to you for your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me get my screen shared. All right, there, I think you should be looking at this. So I'll introduce myself, and I think if it's all right with you, Mr. Chair, I'll have Mr. Erickson introduce himself as well after I talk for a minute. I'm Alexis Stengel. I usually go by Lexi. I am the Senate Counsel assigned to the Redistricting Committee. I'm excited to be here. Mr. Erickson and I have really been, you know, all in on preparing for redistricting for the last nearly a decade for me and almost as long for Mr. Erickson. So we're excited to be here and assist the committee with whatever we can. And I think if it's all right with you, Mr. Chair, I'll let Mr. Erickson introduce himself.
Yeah, that'd be good. And I am sorry, I apologize. I should have had staff introduce themselves too. We have some tremendous staff. So Mr. Erickson, why don't you go, and then we'll have other members of the staff introduce themselves as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Andrew Erickson. I'm the research analyst for the Redistricting Committee. I also serve I'm assigned to the State Government Committee and also to the Vets and Military Affairs Committee. As Ms. Stengel said, we've been working for this moment for a number of years, putting resources together. If there's anything that I can do to be of help to you, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I'd like to introduce Paul Carlson. He will be he'll be my right-hand man through running this committee here, and familiar face to many of you. But Paul, why don't you introduce yourself?
Paul Carlson. I previously worked for Senator Kiffmeyer in the State Government Finance Policy and Elections Committee. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Golding.
Morning, everyone. My name's Will. I am Senator Johnson's legislative assistant, and I'm excited to be a part of this committee.
All right, thank you. Now, I haven't forgotten anybody, have I? Everybody's introduced. All right, Ms. Stengel, why don't we turn it over to you officially now?
All right. Let me pull the Zoom screen off so you're not looking at that. And I think we can start rolling. So redistricting, we could talk about redistricting starting now and probably going until this time next Friday. There's a lot to know and a lot to think about and a lot to learn. We have about an hour that I have with you today. So I'm going to talk about a lot of things, and I'm going to talk about it at a really high level. My goal is to just sort of get the concepts out there so you know that it's a thing, and if you have questions about it later, I'm certainly happy to come back and answer whatever questions you have, to do another presentation, whatever it is that you need. Andrew and I are here for you. So with that, let's get rolling. So what is redistricting and why do we do it? So redistricting is the act of drawing maps to represent the population equally. A lot of times you're going to hear people talking about reapportionment, and sometimes people use the words interchangeably, but they're actually different. Reapportionment is more about the numbers. It's about taking the numbers and reassigning them. So that's what Congress does when they get the census numbers. They reapportion them among the states in the congressional districts. And then the states do the redistricting, and that's the actual map drawing. So why do we do redistricting? And it's the concept of one person, one vote. And you'll see the Supreme Court justice there who wrote that opinion. I'm sure you've all heard one person, one vote. And that was a 1963 US Supreme Court opinion that requires redistricting to be done on a regular basis to ensure that all people are treated equally when their votes are cast. And it's interesting to note that prior to the 60s, there weren't a lot of requirements about redistricting on a regular basis. And in fact, districts that were drawn in Minnesota in 1913 were in place until 1959. So until the 60s, when there was a lot of new law on redistricting, it didn't happen very often, and districts got really sort of unbalanced in their populations. So sometimes when we're talking about redistricting, it can kind of feel like it has a language all of its own. I want to point out NCSL has a really great glossary to use. If you're hearing words and you're not quite sure what they mean, that's a great resource. I'll try to define the terms as I go along today. If I miss anything, let me know. So who does redistricting? In Minnesota, the state constitution requires Minnesota to conduct redistricting. Some other states do different things. So we've heard in the legislature in the past talk about commissions. And that's something other states will use to either advise the legislature on what to do, or in some states, the commission is completely independent of the legislature and draws maps without legislative action. And in one state, which is Iowa, they have nonpartisan staff draw the maps. Just wanted to mention that in case there's further discussion, you have a little background. But in Minnesota, it's the legislature and the legislature alone. So let's talk a little bit about timeline. I'm sure you're all wondering, what's going on with the census? When do we do things? What are we going to do? So let me first start with what the timeline would look like in a year where we didn't have a pandemic. So January 1st of 2020, all of the precinct boundaries were frozen. And that has to do with ensuring that when people are dealing with the census data, those precinct boundaries aren't changed, because that's part of how the data is reported. So you want that to remain uniform throughout the census process. April 1st was Census Day, and the federal law requires population counts to go to the president by December 31st. Then usually in early January, Congress would reapportion the congressional seats and let the states know how many seats they will have. By March 31st, the states will get their data. Now you see on the slide, it says PL 94-171 data. Basically all that means is it refers to Public Law 94-171, which was passed in 1975. And that law required the Census Bureau to provide the data to states, and provided a process for the states to work with the Census Bureau on getting that data in a way that will work for them. So for whatever reason, that's the shorthand for redistricting data, PL 94-171. Then we see some state requirements. So our state constitution tells us in 2021, May 16th will be the last day of the regular session. Looking ahead to 2022, there is a state statute that says the legislature will complete its redistricting of both legislative and congressional districts by February 15th in a year ending in 2, so 2022. Then you have some other deadlines. Candidates must establish residence in their new districts by May 8th. The filing period mid to late May, the August primary, and then the November general election. So I think we're probably all aware that the census isn't proceeding along this timeline. So let's look at an edited schedule so we can see what that will look like. So we know the president hasn't received the data yet. We know that Congress hasn't reapportioned congressional seats yet. We don't know when that will happen. The Census Bureau hasn't given a hard and fast date about when they will release that data to Congress. And then of course, Congress can't reallocate the seats until they have the data. Different sources are saying different things about when the president will get the data. But it does sound like it won't be until at least February that the president will get the data. So what does that mean for the March 31st deadline? Will the states all get their data by March 31st? I think that's questionable. I know the census has said that they will do their best to comply with that. But I think a lot of people in the redistricting world are preparing for what to do if they don't receive the data by March 31st. So if you don't get it by March 31st, when do we get it? I have seen estimates all over the place on when we might get it. Some in the spring, I've heard some people planning for it sometime in this summer. So what does that mean? If the legislature gets it before May 16th, it could still have the time to enact the maps during the regular session. But if it's delivered, really close to the end or after May 16th, the legislature won't have time in its regular session or won't have the ability to do anything during this regular session. So that could mean either pushing it off to the 2022 session or a special session or something along those lines. But remember, there's that February 15th deadline in 2022. And as you know, usually the legislature in an even numbered year doesn't come back until later February. So when you're looking at when session starts, it's something to consider whether you need to come back early enough or not to do redistricting in 2022. So I think to summarize, we don't know when we're going to get the data. We don't know what that means for our timeline. And the maps can't be drawn until you get the data. So I think we're sort of in a holding pattern until we know more. And hopefully the census will, you know, in the near future come out with a new timeline so we can know what to expect. So those are sort of the easy starting questions. And as I was putting this together, I felt like this is sort of a chicken or an egg situation. You know, there are a lot of things we could talk about, and one of them has to come first. And it might not make sense until you have the other things after it. So sort of bear with me as we sort of start to plow into this. And hopefully as we move through these things, they'll sort of start to come together. And by the end, we'll sort of see how the pieces fit together. And if not, let me know and I'll try again. So the first thing I want to talk about are redistricting principles. And sometimes people call them criteria, but they're the same thing. The principles are what are going to guide you as you are going through the process and as you are drawing maps. It will help you make the decisions and prioritize different things. So principles are found in a variety of different places. There are some that come from the US Constitution and federal law, which every state must comply with. And then states can also adopt their own criteria. And we'll get to our state criteria in just a minute. But I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about the federal law. So coming from the US Constitution, as we talked about, districts have to be, or representatives have to be apportioned among the several states according to their respective numbers. So that hints at population equality. Another one of those cases that I talked about in the 60s from the US Supreme Court says, when you're talking about congressional districts, your population has to be as nearly equal as practicable. And what that means is your deviation between congressional districts needs to be almost identical between the districts. Next, we have the 14th Amendment, and this is often called the Equal Protection Clause, and that's the prohibition on states denying people equal protection to the law. And in the 60s, again, in a different case, the Supreme Court had said equal protection for legislative districts requires substantially equal population. So that's a more forgiving standard when you're looking at population deviation for your legislative districts. It doesn't have to be that one-to-one equality. The 15th Amendment says that the right to vote cannot be denied or abridged based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude. And then, of course, the 1965 Voting Rights Act. This prohibits plans that intentionally or inadvertently discriminate on the basis of race. And just a quick note on the VRA. The VRA, as you probably know, does way more than just deal with redistricting. It has to do with all types of voting and all types of elections. And the purpose is to ensure that all citizens have the right to vote, regardless of their race, color, or membership in a language minority group. But just for today's presentation, I'm only going to focus on the VRA as it applies to redistricting. So a little bit more about population equality. Well, how do you know if you have an equal population? So you need to figure out the ideal population for the type of district. So when we get the census data in Minnesota, you divide that by the number of districts you're trying to find, whether that's 67 Senate, 134 for the House, or 8 for the congressional districts. Or as you may have seen in the news, Minnesota's sort of on the bubble, and we may end up with 7 congressional districts. We'll know hopefully in the near future where we land on that. So once you have that ideal population, you're measuring from that ideal population to see what your deviation is. So as I mentioned before, states can also have their own redistricting criteria. Minnesota has several of those, either in our constitution or in our state law. There are some similar language than what we heard in the federal law about populations needing to be equal or substantially equal. House districts have to be nested in the Senate districts, and that means basically every Senate district is divided into 2 House districts. Senate districts have to be numbered in a regular series. What that means is you start in one corner and go across west to east. All districts are single member districts, meaning you only elect one person from each district. Districts have to be convenient, contiguous territory. And contiguous just sort of, means continuous. You have to be able to get from every part of that district to every other part without ever leaving it. So you can talk a little bit about, what about water? Can you have water contiguity? So could you cross a lake or a river? And generally, the idea is if you can do so conveniently, if there's a bridge or something, that's probably acceptable. Another thing to think about is there's something called point contiguity, and that's, where they only sort of touch just at a single point. And that may or may not be acceptable, sort of depending on how the legislature defines contiguity. And then finally, political subdivisions should not be divided more than necessary. So what does that mean? Don't divide counties more than you need to. Don't divide cities or townships or those sorts of things. Now, of course, there are situations where you're going to have to do that. It's just sort of, don't do it unless you have to. So states can adopt additional criteria. And I wanted to point out some of the ones that Minnesota has used in the past and ones that other states are using. So in the past, probably as far back as I have looked, Minnesota has also adopted additional criteria, but when they did so, they did sort of on a one-time basis. So the additional principles that we didn't already talk about were adopted only for 2011. So the legislature could go ahead and do that again for this cycle, or they could put them into statute to be ongoing. That's a decision you as legislators will need to make. So a little bit about some of these other things you could think about when you're looking at principles. Compactness is a very common one. It goes very well with convenient and contiguous. It's just about having a uniform shape as much as possible. Preserving communities of interest is another principle. And the idea there is to keep geographical areas like neighborhoods or regions together when residents have a common political interest that might not line up with your political subdivision boundaries. Examples of this could include ethnic, geographic, social, or cultural interests. Preserving cores of prior districts. So the idea with that is, do you throw out all the old districts and start from scratch, or do you try to preserve the cores of your previous districts and sort of just work around the edges of the existing districts? And then one other principle some states use is to avoid pairing incumbents. So there you look at where all of the incumbents live and then try to draw districts so you don't have anybody matched up.
Ms. Stengel.
Yes.
We do have a question by Senator Murphy. Would you mind taking that now, or would you prefer them after the presentation?
I would defer to you on that, Mr. Chair.
All right, Senator Murphy, if it's a quick question, let's just take it now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is a quick question. Ms. Stengel, can you speak to the principles that guide our treatment of reservations in the state of Minnesota and tribal nations?
Mr. Chair and Senator Murphy, I can answer that quickly. No, I can't answer that because I don't know the answer to it. It's not something I've looked into, but I will certainly make a note of that and look into it and let the committee know what I find.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Ms. Stengel, I think we have to pay attention and not divide them, but I would look for your answer. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Some of the emerging criteria are things that a few states have been considering over the last, decade, maybe in the last cycle. One of these things is competitiveness, which means you're trying to draw districts that are competitive between the parties. And of course, you can't do this in all areas of every state, but where possible, draw competitive districts. And then some of the other criteria have to do with whether you want to favor or disfavor political parties, and what is or is not appropriate. Should you be looking at political data? Should there be a ban on looking at political data when you're drawing these maps? And there's a few different iterations of how that looks in other states. I'm sure somebody's wondering what we did in 2010. The courts drew the maps in 2010. And they adopted redistricting principles for that decade. So again, briefly, they can't be drawn with purpose or effect of denying or bridging voting rights. convenient contiguous territory, don't divide political subdivisions, where possible, preserve communities of interest. And then they had a last factor about not protecting or defeating incumbents. And the court indicated that was a subordinate factor, which basically meant comply with this where you can, but if you can't comply with this, do all of the others first. And then, of course, those were the principles for both legislative and congressional districts. There were some unique ones for congressional only. Of course, we know population has to be as nearly equal as practicable. And for legislative, the districts have to be nested. And the ideal population was a 2% deviation, and that was the court's goals there. So how do you draw maps? It used to be that had to be done by hand, and there were big pieces of paper hung on walls, and it was a very elaborate and not terribly accurate process. Fortunately, now we have GIS software, and GIS is Geographic Information Systems. Minnesota will be using Maptitude, which is a product by Caliper, and this is the same product we've used in past decades. And you can see on the screen capture there, this is sort of what the software looks like. So what happens is the census data is fed into the program, and then it allows people to manipulate that data to draw your maps. Each caucus in the House and Senate have their own software licensing and printer plotter and those sorts of things to assist you with your map drawing. So as you're drawing maps, there are a variety of ways that you can select territory and how you can manipulate and move things around. As you see, you're getting all sorts of data as you are building your map. You can see population demographics, you can see percentage of your population deviation. So you sort of know as you're going along what you're building. And you see the picture of a tiger. What do tigers have to do with redistricting? Well, nothing, but it's an acronym that you'll probably hear, and I wanted to mention it. So TIGER stands for Topologically Integrated Geographic Encoding and Referencing. So this is the system that the US Census Bureau has developed. So you'll hear people talking about TIGER data, and that's the data that's going to be going into the system. You probably yourselves might not be working with the TIGER data directly, but that is what it is when you're hearing people talk about it. So a little bit more about census geographies. So this, could go higher than this. Of course, you have the nation, you sort of work down. You all know what Minnesota and counties are, but I wanted to mention census tracts. So these are small, relatively permanent geographic areas that are within a single county. So they usually have between 2,500 and 8,000 people. And the census tries to keep these census tracts uniform over time. They will divide them into new districts when population growth requires it. And they do that because then they can sort of track trends over time in the same area. The next group that gets a little bit smaller is the census block groups. These have about 600 to 3,000 people. And they're statistical divisions of a census tract. And they usually tend to follow neighborhoods. And finally, census blocks are the very smallest piece of data that the census will give you. And it's these census blocks that you'll be using when you draw your maps to build your maps. You'll be moving and manipulating census blocks either individually or as groups. And it's important to note that there's no set population, and there are many instances where there will be census blocks with 0 people in them. Those census blocks do still need to be included in your map, however, because you need to cover the entire geography of the state. So you've gone through the process now and you have a map, and how do you analyze that map? So Maptitude will auto-generate several kinds of reports for each map that is drawn. And this is a list of reports that were received in 2011. I suspect this time around there will be very similar reports, but there might also be some new ones. So you get a population summary, which is on the screen. And I see part of it's cut off. It says including deviation from ideal. So you can look at that and it will tell you what the deviation is. So you can quickly and easily tell by district or overall whether you're complying. It will give you minority population totals per district. It will give you minority voting age population per district. It will tell you whether your districts are contiguous, and what they look for there is whether there are more than one distinct areas for each district. Compactness is actually a really interesting one. There are I don't know, maybe 10 different ways or more that you can measure compactness, either with a mathematical formula or a measurement. It's really sort of a fascinating area to look at, especially if you're into math. I won't go into that today, but there are different measures, and you get a handful of those in the report. It will tell you which subdivisions have been split and how many times. It will tell you whether incumbents are paired or if there are open districts. And then the plan component report is sort of the one that you can look at, and it sort of gives you a narrative of what's in each district. It will tell you which counties, which parts of cities, which parts of towns, that sort of thing. Other ways to analyze the map, there are a lot of people out there that specialize and that are experts in redistricting law and redistricting analytics. And more you're seeing computer people and mathematicians get involved in giving sort of a statistical analysis. So you might look to, local universities or other sort of experts to help you look at a map and see if it's doing what you want it to do. So how does this all fit into the legislative process? So it's the regular process, but it's kind of different, right? So we talked about maps, they're drawn, they're evaluated, and once somebody has a map that they're happy with, it needs to be introduced as a bill. And we can't put a picture of a map into our statute. So there has to be some way to reference that map in a narrative format. And there's on the screen, you can see an example of what was done in 2011. And this was chapter 35, which was vetoed. So basically what this does is say the legislative redistricting plan, and then it has the unique name, is the plan that we are adopting. And so the idea there is you see that uniquely coded map, and then you can find the map and sort of read them together. There are different ways that you can describe a map in a bill. This is the way that we've done it in the past. This is sometimes referred to as adopting a map or adopting a shapefile. There are other options that could be considered. One is to code a meets and bounds description of each district. That's going to be significantly lengthier, and meets and bounds sometimes are difficult to make sure they're accurate because they are so long and detailed. You could list all of the addresses that are in each district, starting with District 1, list all of the street addresses. And then another option is the block equivalency file. So basically what this does is it takes those census blocks and says, for each Senate district or each House district, these are the census blocks assigned to that district. So whichever way is selected, it will be put into a bill draft that will be introduced, and then it goes through the committee process, through the floor, through conference committee, and it goes to the governor for signature or veto. And along the way, you're looking at the bill, but also the map will sort of travel with it, but the map itself is never actually adopted in its map form. It's always just the bill with the reference or the description. We talked about principles. If the legislature decides to adopt principles, it could do so in the same bill as it's adopting its redistricting plan, or it could be done in a separate bill. That's again a decision for the legislature to make on how they want to proceed with principles if they do choose to adopt additional ones.
May I ask a quick question here? Would you define principles for me, please?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair and Senator Kunesh. Redistricting principles are those list of things we talked about earlier about contiguity, compactness, don't divide your subdivisions, and basically a redistricting principle. It sounds like a redundant definition, but it's the principle or the idea that's going to guide you as you're drawing your maps. So they're the list of things you want to accomplish. So when you're looking at drawing your map, you want to accomplish population equality. You want to make sure that it is not discriminating against anyone on the basis of race. You want to make sure that they're compact and contiguous. You want to make sure you're preserving communities of interest, all those sorts of things. So as you're drawing your maps, you have your list of ideals you're trying to accomplish, and you're trying to integrate that with the data you're working with on the software. So it's really sort of your list of priorities that is going to help you make your decisions.
Any follow-up, Senator?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Stengel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So after the bill goes through the legislative process and the governor signs it, what happens then? So the LCC, the Legislative Coordinating Commission, has to deposit that plan with the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State then has several obligations, including providing that to the counties, who then provide it to the city clerks, and it trickles down that way. The Secretary must make copies of all of the information available to the public. I will also note that the LCC always has this data on their website as well, even though they're not required to by statute. The revisor is then required to code a meets and bounds description of the district in statute. That's assuming that the legislature hasn't already decided to do that. And I will, as I mentioned before, there are pros and cons to doing a meets and bounds description. If it's not done, the revisor will do that afterwards as a description of the map. There is a plan, a statute in place now that talks about how do you make corrections, for example, if a territory is included twice or not included at all. And there's a system to determine which district to include it in any situation. And then once redistricting is done, the Secretary of State works to coordinate data exchange between different computer systems to ensure everybody has it that needs it and in a way that they can use it. So what about the courts? So the courts don't have a predefined plan or predefined place in the process of redistricting. However, in Minnesota, it's frequently been the case over the last several decades that for one reason or another, the legislature either doesn't enact a plan or the plan has been vetoed. In that case, the court will step in and draw the maps in place of the legislature. In the last cycle, a special panel of 5 judges was appointed by the Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court, and they were the ones that did the plan drawing. And of course, if there are any challenges regarding redistricting plans that were enacted, they will be filed with the courts. And just a note on lawsuits, I anticipate that as soon as the state gets the data about the population, generally, as in past decades, there are lawsuits immediately challenging the districts as being out of balance with population requirements. So I would anticipate to see those once the state has the data. The court will generally sort of put those on hold and let the legislative process play out, and will only step in again, generally speaking, if the legislature misses its legislative deadline and somebody has to draw the plans. Happy to talk more about that later if that's of help or interest to anybody. We can't really talk about redistricting without talking about gerrymandering, or as Mr. Erickson tells me, gerrymandering, because it is named after the former governor, Elbridge Gerry. I will use the term gerrymandering. This is a term of art to describe a plan or a district that's intentionally drawn to advantage a group over another. So usually when you think about gerrymandering, you think about these weird shapes like you see there. And there are a couple of types of gerrymandering I want to mention specifically because I'm sure you either have or will be hearing about them. So partisan gerrymandering is something that's been in the courts a lot over the last decade, and a lot of people are thinking about. Partisan gerrymandering is intentionally drawing districts to benefit one party over the other. And courts have really struggled with this for a long time over whether this is acceptable or not, and how do you measure it? And in 2019, the US Supreme Court said, this is a political question. It's not for federal courts to decide. We're done looking at this issue. So what does that mean? It means the federal courts aren't going to look at cases challenging districts based on partisan gerrymandering grounds. It is still very much open for states to look at based on their state constitution or state laws. So I think what this really means is there's going to be sort of a shift in where do you litigate about partisan gerrymandering. It's going to move from federal to state courts. Racial gerrymandering is something that the courts have dealt with for a really long time. So racial gerrymandering is a deliberate and arbitrary distortion of district boundaries for racial purposes. So as we talked about earlier, the Equal Protection Clause prohibits the use of race as a predominant motive in drawing your district maps, unless there are 1, the districts are narrowly tailored, and they are there to achieve a compelling state interest. Now, for the lawyers in the group, you get what this means, and it makes sense because these are pretty legal terms, but let me sort of talk a little bit about what that means. So narrowly tailored means it has to be very specific, in its intent and purpose, and it needs to be addressing a particular problem in a very specific way. Now, what is a compelling state interest? The courts have said in the past, a compelling state interest could be eradicating the effects of past discrimination or complying with the VRA. So sometimes the VRA will require you to draw districts in a certain way. So that could look like gerrymandering, but in particular cases that may be acceptable. The VRA Section 2 prohibits vote dilution of minority population. And here they're looking at the effect or result, not necessarily the intent. So what do I mean when I say vote dilution? There are two sort of general categories of vote dilution. One is where the political process isn't equally open to minorities because of the use of multi-member districts or at-large voting systems, which doesn't really come into play in Minnesota because we have all single-member districts in the legislature and in Congress. But the other is where dilution of a racial minority group occurs in a single member district, which we have, by either dispersing minorities into districts where they constitute an ineffective minority, or where majorities are concentrated into districts so that they constitute an excessive majority. This is often called packing and cracking, and I'll come back to that in just a second. But I do want to mention, federal courts are still very active in racial gerrymandering cases, unlike partisan gerrymandering. So you will see litigation ongoing in federal court about this particular issue. So I want to spend a minute on packing and cracking, because I think it's sort of a complicated concept to sort of understand. So let's look at this district of 100 happy people. We see 53 green smiley faces and 47 yellow smiley faces. And I do want to say Matt Gehring in House Research put a lot of time into creating these slides, and he very kindly let me use them. So thank you to Matt if he's watching. So let's look at, what does packing mean? So as I mentioned before, packing is when a group is consolidated in a supermajority in a small number of districts. So it reduces its electoral influence in the other districts. So you see here, the yellow smiley faces win here. They win 4 of the 5 districts, even though they have 6 fewer yellows. And they do that by packing greens into one district where there are 19 green smiley faces and only 1 yellow. So that's what it means when it's talking about an ineffective supermajority. They're all packed into a district in a way that allows yellow an advantage. So cracking is sort of the opposite of that. It is when you take the electoral strength of a particular group and divide it as much as you can. So here you see green wins by dispersing yellow into, districts in a way that green either wins or there is a tie. So yellow doesn't win any districts in this situation. There are various iterations of this. I won't go into those today, but that's just an example of how packing and cracking works when you're starting to look at how people are put together. Local redistricting, the legislature doesn't really do any of the local redistricting except for the Met Council. So the legislature will do redistricting for the Met Council once the legislative and congressional seats are all done. And that's effective in a year ending in 3. So it has to be done by 2023. The locals will also have to do some redistricting in some cases. And their timeline is based on when the legislative maps are enacted. So once the legislative map is enacted, whether that's by the legislature or whether that's by a court, cities with wards then have 60 days to adopt their maps, or 19 weeks before the primary, whichever comes first. And then you have counties and a variety of other places, locals that have to redistrict. They're looking at 80 days after enactment of the map, or 15 weeks before the state primary. And then, of course, cities and towns must reestablish their election precincts sort of after the legislative districts are drawn, and they have 60 days to do that. Other state laws worth mentioning. As I mentioned, the courts drew the maps in 2011. There were a few situations that required corrections. So you can see the legislature came in and had to do a correction in Senate and House Districts 39, 39A and B, and Senate District 49, 49A and 49B. One of the examples was the district line was inadvertently drawn down the hallway of an apartment building. So people that lived across the hall from each other were in different districts. So that was corrected. So the entire building was in one district or the other. And I believe the other one had to do with it might have even been a 0 population census block that was just moved to complete a piece of property or a township or something like that. Another piece has to do with using the term re-elect. Essentially, this won't necessarily apply to any of you because you are incumbents, but if there are people out there that are previous office holders that are not currently holding office, there are some limitations on how you can use the term re-elect. And then, of course, there are a smattering of statutes that talk about redistricting in the sense that once you have a new district after redistricting, you have to elect new people or do something like that. That's not actually about the process of redistricting itself. Legislative immunity. I am sure that you're all aware of this concept that comes from our state law that says members are not held civilly liable on account of an action done in pursuance of legislative duties. And I want to mention this and also say I am not an expert in this area, but it is an evolving area of law when it comes to redistricting. And what I mean by that is usually in the past, in many areas, legislative immunity has been, very strongly upheld, and it's something that legislators can really rely on to use to protect themselves in their legislative duties. But we've been seeing over the last decade or so that courts have been more willing to disregard or set aside this privilege when it comes to the redistricting realm. So if there is a lawsuit about redistricting, the legislative immunity provisions might not be as strong or as protective as you might expect in other situations. And there's a great resource by one of my colleagues in my office, Eric Sylvia, has done a great memo on legislative immunity and where it comes from and its process. So I would suggest that's a good read if you want to know more about this. Resources. This might be the most important thing we talk about today. There are a lot of resources out there, a lot of people to help you. So of course, Mr. Erickson and I are here as your nonpartisan staff. What does that mean? It means we're here to help answer your questions about the process, about the law, about drafting bills, drafting amendments, those sorts of things. You have your partisan staff, you know what your partisan staff does for you, but in this case, partisan staff will actually be assisting you with drawing the maps. Andrew and I have less of a role in that. There are some members and staff who were here for the redistricting in 2010 and 2011. They might be a great resource. The LCC has a GIS office, and they are wonderful experts at map drawing. They are doing all sorts of things for us all decade long, but redistricting is sort of their time to shine. They are the ones that are working with Maptitude and making sure all of the data is in there and ready to go. There are all sorts of outside experts that can help you in a variety of ways. There are a lot of interest groups that are really interested in redistricting and what that should look like and what should be achieved. And I will put in a plug for NCSL. I think that their redistricting resources are just phenomenal, and they have a whole variety of them. So if you're sort of looking at an entry level, what is redistricting nuts and bolts, they have something called Into the Thicket, and that's a starter toolkit. And that is available online. And it's a shorter read of the basics of everything you're going to need to know about redistricting. The next resource is called the Red Book. Some of you may have it. It looks like this. If you don't have one of these, I would suggest you get one. It is actually called Redistricting Law, but it's usually referred to as the Red Book. And this is sort of the book of everything you need to know. It gives you all of the legal analysis. It gives you all of the case law. It gives you all of the details on all of the things you're going to need to know about redistricting. This particular book is not available online, but as members and staff, you can get a free copy from NCSL by emailing them. If you would like assistance in getting a copy of a Red Book, let me know. I can submit that request for you, but I really think it's a really, really helpful tool, and it's written in a really easy to understand manner. NCSL also has a redistricting email list that they send out updates on regularly. Lately, most of the updates have been about the census, when can we expect data, what's going on. So that's a great way to sort of keep in touch and hear about all of these sort of quick moving things. If you'd like more information or help signing up for that, let me know. I can help you with that. And then, of course, the NCSL website. We covered a lot of territory really quickly. I'm happy to talk to you. Andrew is happy to talk to you. We are both working remotely right now, so email's probably the best way to get in touch with us, but we are both also checking our voicemail. If you prefer to talk by phone, just give us a call, leave us a message, and we'll get back to you. As I promised Paul, we have about half an hour for questions. We'll do our best to answer what we can and find out what we don't know and get back to everybody later.
Well, thank you, Ms. Stengel. So with that NCSL book, do we get your signature in it as well as an author, part of that book? You're kind of humble there. Ms. Stengel did write sections of that book, so we're in good hands here. With that, questions, members? One question I had, if we could, is there any, our date right now is looking at February 15th. I know next year we're likely to go into session probably in February at some point. Other states have looked at moving that statutory deadline, maybe back to March or something like that. Is that something that we need to be looking at doing now? Or do you think we're fairly safe with that February 15th deadline?
Mr. Chair and members, I wish I could give you a great answer to that. I don't know when we're going to get the data. I don't know what the schedule looks like. I don't know what the leadership will decide on when to come back in 2022. All factors to consider. I know, as you mentioned, other states are looking at this. Minnesota is fortunate that the deadline is not in its constitution, so the legislature could amend that. I know some states struggle because the date is in their constitution, and that requires a lot more work to move. So the legislature certainly could consider whether it's advisable to push that date out a little bit further. I would say to keep in mind, as I mentioned when I was going over the timeline, it's early May when members have to live in their district. Mid to late May is when they have to file. So there needs to sort of be a consideration that there are sort of other deadlines that either need to also be adjusted or you need to move the deadline soon enough to comply with those. The other sort of complicating factor in this is the courts in the past here have sort of viewed that legislative deadline as the moment when they'll step in and sort of take over redistricting. So I would be curious to know what the court would do in that situation. Say, for example, the legislature moved the deadline to, May 1st. There's not a lot of time between that deadline and filing. Would the courts wait that long, or would they sort of pick their own date to sort of step in? And I don't know the answer to that. Just another factor to sort of think about as you're thinking, when is a good time for that deadline and how does it work for everybody?
All right, thank you. Let's see, we've got a question from Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Stengel, is there any guidance? So you talked about the February 15th date. If the courts were to take it up and they were to go into March or April in making that decision, is there a mechanism that changes those timelines for candidates, or don't we have any guidance on that yet?
Mr. Chair and members, look, I'm not sure I'll give you a helpful answer. So let me tell you what I think you're asking, and then if I miss it, you can tell me to try again. So all of those deadlines are sort of established in state law. So in theory, the legislature could push everything back. You could say filing goes into June, the primary maybe moves. Like you could move all sorts of stuff if you wanted to. Whether that's advisable as a matter of policy is not a question for me, but I think people might have some strong feelings on that. As for what the court thinks or when they would get involved, I don't know the answer to that. When they would step in, what they would think about all of this. In the past, they just used the statutory deadline. That's given them enough time to complete the process. So I suppose if there was a discussion about that, the Supreme Court might weigh in on that, or they might not. I don't know.
All right, thank you. Any follow-up, Senator Pratt?
No, thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you. Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just a couple of questions, if you will. Mr. Chair and Ms. Stengel, the first is, I'm wondering if there is a pattern to, or if you can describe for us a little bit the process and the timeline that the courts have taken when the legislature hasn't successfully completed a map.
Ms. Stengel?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I can give you sort of a brief overview of this now, and then I can follow up if you would like more detail. So basically, what will happen is somebody will file a lawsuit probably shortly after we get our data. And the court will look at that and say, this is a legislative priority, so we're going to, temporarily stay our action on this. So what that means is they're sort of preparing a little bit in the background. They're not actually drawing their maps. They're not preparing data. They're not, having hearings on this. They're pushing it all off. But they're positioning themselves to step in pretty quickly. So in 2012, when the legislative deadline had passed and there was no map enacted, the courts had positioned themselves to really quickly step into action. And they were ready to roll. So they had a few public hearings around the state to talk about data, and they were able to very quickly draw the maps and get those enacted. Forget the exact timeline, but before early May. So it met with all of the other timelines. So they won't actually be an active participant or really making any decisions in the process. They'll be in the background, just sort of waiting in the wings in case they need to be ready. But they will be ready to step into action pretty quickly if they need to.
Thank you, Ms. Stengel. Mr. Erickson, is that going to be part of your overview of what the court's rule is the next time that we meet?
Mr. Chair, it certainly can be. I think my intention is to make it a little bit more of a long view of, how things have proceeded through the decades. I can bring it up to that point. Some of that is going to touch on Ms. Stengel's area more specifically, so I could definitely have her provide some input on how to flesh out those portions.
Sure. I think that's a very poignant question. So thank you for that. And thank you, Senator Murphy. Do you have a follow-up?
I do, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Ms. Stengel, this is a separate question. Given the fact that the delivery of the census data is delayed, do you have advice for us about the work that we can do in the absence of that data, anticipating that it will come so that we're ready to go? You've given us a lot of information, so I'm just thinking about the order of operation and if you can give us any guidance.
Ms. Stengel?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Before I answer your question, I just want to note that all of the court documents from 2011 and from 2001 are online. If people are interested in reading the pleadings and all of the orders and the maps and all that stuff, I can send those links to Mr. Carlson and he can forward those to the group if people are interested. There's an immense amount of documentation to read, but it is pretty interesting and you can sort of see the timeline as it's posted, if that's helpful. Sort of getting back to your question about what does the legislature do until it gets the data? As I mentioned, without the data, you can't really do a whole lot with the software. You can't, there's nothing in there, so you can't draw your maps, you can't start drawing your districts, you can't really do any of those things yet. That's all on hold. I think in past decades, this is the sort of thing that the redistricting committee has done, held informational overviews, had various people come in and talk about what is the law, how do we do this, what's the history, so people have sort of a solid grounding in the concepts when they get the data. It would be a time that you could gather, public input either through the committee or through your districts or whatever other ways the legislature wants to sort of listen to what your constituents' priorities are. As I mentioned, principles are something that don't necessarily tie with the data. The legislature could consider adopting a list of principles for the maps that it will draw when it gets the data. This sort of goes both ways. Some states sometimes will adopt the principles ahead of time and then draw their maps. Other times it's sort of a collaborative process where it happens at once. In 2011, the bill carried the principles and the maps in the same bill. So that's sort of a policy decision on whether you want to take that up or not. If there are any desire to talk about commissions or other types of redistricting schemes or processes, that's something that could be done without the numbers. So I think now is just sort of the time to think and talk about policies that aren't related to the numbers.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Isaacson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. and I didn't hear this, but maybe this isn't the right part for it, but are there examples or what are considered like by most people as being really good examples of where redistricting has occurred in a way that's seen as nonpartisan and effective? And if there are such examples, is there a way to get some information about what they did in terms of if there's, and I'm not sure there is such a thing, because I'm sure a map that I think is good, Senator Pratt may not, or vice versa, right? Which is fair. Objective people, reasonable people can disagree. But I'm wondering if there's examples of where we can look at states that did it really well, and then look at that as something as a guidepost, or maybe just extra information moving forward.
Ms. Stengel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Off the top of my head, I can't think of anything. If you're there's all sorts of metrics that you can measure this by. One of the things people talk about is the amount of litigation that a plan is subject to. And in that regard, Minnesota has done really well. In the last cycle, the courts drew the plan and there weren't any lawsuits challenging the legality of that plan. So in some regards, that process worked out well. In other regards, it didn't, because the legislature has the authority, and it didn't work out according to how the Constitution had it envisioned. So you could see that in different ways. There are different measures on whether people think a commission does or does not draw a better map. And I think all sorts of people agree or disagree on whether commissions can draw more or less partisan maps. So I don't know that there's any state that says, boy, they do it the right way. But I can think about it some more. And if I come up with anything, I will certainly let you know.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Isaacson, follow up.
Yes. So really, because the principles can be so varied, what one group might take political realities as in effect, the other group doesn't. It's just too hard because it depends on which perspective you're coming from. So you'd really need a unified perspective, then nail that down. Okay, that's super helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Isaacson. And it is interesting to note too that Minnesota, for all the politics that go on here, how we have shifted both in the House between the two parties and in the Senate as well, and how close those are. So, you can look at that too, I think, as a measure of how our process has gone. With that, I see Senator Kunish has her hand up. Senator Kunish.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would sort of like to go back to maybe looking at the role of our 11 tribes in redistricting. And Alexis, I heard you say that, you weren't too familiar with how that works within the boundaries of reservations. But when you were speaking about what can we do now, talk to our communities, listen to folks around the state, thinking back on Executive Order 1924 that the governor has specifically ensured that there is government-to-government communication and relationship with the tribes. Will that make any difference in conversations going forward, or their specific unique participation in redistricting?
Ms. Stengel?
I think that's a very interesting question. And I think to some degree, it is the legislature who does the redistricting. They're the ones that vote on this. So the tribes won't, aside from, members that represent those areas of our state, the tribes won't actually have a seat at the table to vote on the final maps. That really is more of a discussion, talking to them, communicating at a state level, communicating at an individual level. Perhaps when there are maps that are being drawn and there are hearings about those maps, the tribes can come in and weigh in on what that is. So I would encourage, members that have those tribal areas in their districts to talk with them, or, all of you to talk with them to sort of get their input. It's sort of the idea, the same concept with other, communities of interest. Who is a community of interest in your mind? How do you define that? And how do you portray that in your maps? So perhaps one thing you could think about, Senator Kunish, is when we're talking about principles and we're talking about preserving communities of interest, you could define a community of interest as tribal lands or tribal areas or certain subsets of certain areas of the state. So you could sort of build that into the principles to make sure that is something that the legislature is considering when it's drawing maps.
Thank you. No follow-up. Thank you.
Senator Kiffmeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think having some background and experience with redistricting, and especially I have for the last couple of years done a fair amount of research because my committee State Gov has redistricting in it for the past 4 years. So it was something that in budgeting, making sure that every caucus, the legislature and everybody else had the funds they needed for the equipment and to do that kind of preparatory work. But also had hearings on commissions. And the question that I had was, who is more likely to go to court kind of a situation? Is there a difference if you have a commission drawing plans, whatever kind of commission, and there are about as many commissions as there are in existence, they're all set up a little bit different. And then there's the legislative plans. And one of the most interesting things is that commissions are actually a little bit more likely to go to court than our legislative districts. But that's all subjective and context and other things. But it certainly didn't say that in that looking at it that they are less likely. So it's quite a bit on a fairly level playing field in regards to commissions and legislative drawing of districts. So, but Mr. Chair, maybe Ms. Stengel can add to that because she has a lot more extensive information as well. And she and I had many conversations about this.
And Senator Kiffmeyer, we can certainly go and talk about commissions and the process that we currently have. And we're open to that. We're still trying to figure out the jurisdictional basis of the committee, if we're going to be holding some of those policy debates within the redistricting committee or still keeping them within your committee over at State Gov. But, if we want to just answer that general question, Ms. Stengel, we can do that briefly and then move on from here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members. I don't think I have a lot to add. Certainly legislative or plans enacted by commissions have been subject to lawsuits. I think commissions are sort of a newer concept. So over time, we don't have a ton of data, but I think there is some information out there that, maybe the litigation is about the same or maybe a little higher for plans by commission. And again, commissions are made up all sorts of different ways, so that may or may not play into it. I think I should just stop there. So I can look into that further if the committee wants me to.
All right. Thank you very much. And thank you, Senator Kiffmeyer, for the question. Any further questions at this point? Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your Friday to meet. I think this was a wonderful beginning place. So thank you, Ms. Stengel, for the opportunity to get together and get an overview of this. I think next steps, sometime next week, Mr. Erickson is going to go through the history of redistricting and some of the things that Minnesota has experienced in the last, 100 years or so. Hopefully the presentation isn't quite that long, but we'll discuss that. So stay tuned for an invitation to that committee hearing. I'm not sure if we got a time set up quite yet. Still working on that. Mr. Carlson's working on that. So with that, if there is no further business before the committee, we are now adjourned. Have a wonderful weekend.